In the financial space now, the Board of Directors of SunTrust Bank Nigeria Limited has elected Olarewaju Shitu as the chairman of the Board of Directors to replace Jibril Aku. Now, the board has already approved the appointment of Mohammed Dati Yola as the non-executive director subject to the approval of the Central Bank of Nigeria. Until his appointment, Mr. Shitu was a director at the Central Bank of Nigeria. He retired in the year 2018 and is a holder of MBA degree, Fellow Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, Associate Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, and an Associate Chartered Institute of Taxation, Nigeria. Well, it's now time to bring you a first feature on the show today. The International Air Transport Association has predicted heavier losses for the aviation industry this year and also for the year 2021. According to a report titled Deep Losses Continue into 2021, IATA predicts a net loss of $118.5 billion for the year 2020. This is higher than the $84.3 billion earlier forecast in the month of June this year. The report released earlier this week also predicts a net loss of $38.7 billion in the year 2021, higher than the $15.8 billion forecast in the month of June. It further explains that the second half of the year 2021 is expected to see improvements after a difficult first half of the year 2021. It also recommends aggressive cost-cutting measures as the solution to drive increased demand in the year 2021, with hopes that either a vaccine or safe reopening of borders would turn the industry around. IATA's Director General and Chief Executive Officer Alexandra de Dunac also explains that losing $38.7 billion next year is nothing worth celebrating. He also says that the crisis is devastating and unrelenting. Airlines have so far cut costs by 45.8%, but revenues are down 60.9%. Well, joining me now in our Lagos studio to bring some fresh perspective to this discussion, I have with me the Chief Operating Officer of Jet Support Services, Chukwu Erika Achim. Good to have you on the Business Nigeria show today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, starting off with a prediction from IATA as well, looking at the fact that we're expecting a plunge in terms of losses, $118 billion, away from the earlier prediction of just slightly over $80 billion. This is quite a huge slump. Now, for Nigeria as well, at this point in time, with the impact we've seen on the global space, this prediction is much more worrying. Let's take an analysis from the global perspective and then bring it back home to Nigeria.
Well, yes, those numbers are quite scary. I mean, if you look at the strong revenue projection for 2020 and 2021, I mean, it is easy for anybody to be scared. You know, however, I think the main issue I have with the report is using 2019 as a benchmark. If you use 2019, which is the best year ever in aviation, as a benchmark, it will be very difficult to see any growth or recovery. 16 years ago, 2003, to be precise, we had total revenue figures of around $322 billion by commercial airlines. So, and this was without any COVID. It took us 16 years to get to current to 2019 figures, which IATA is using as a benchmark. So yes, I understand that there has been an impairment. I understand that the airlines are bleeding, but if we are to really be, I mean, realistic, I think that measuring year on year, we will see very, very good rapidity in terms of growth starting from next year. Yes, there are some assets on the balance sheet that the airlines would, of course, need to liquidate. But if you're talking about growth particularly, we are expecting to see a lot of growth in 2021.
Well, we're also expecting the passenger numbers would also plummet about 1.8 billion. How do you also think this would also play out, especially looking at the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic? We are yet to see these vaccines really get tested and people get the shots. Now, we have two windows of opportunities. Either we have the vaccines coming to bear or we have the reopening of borders without the quarantining. How do you think these will play out?
Yes, I mean, passenger bias, of course, or travel bias is the issue here. Passengers are, of course, not willing to travel if it is not essential. But we do believe that, I mean, the safest way to travel is still aviation. I mean, there was a documentary showing that, I mean, the infection rates on an airplane is at least 60% lower than that of being in a mall or being in a restaurant. So yes, with the anticipated vaccines coming on, we hope to see increased incremental growth in passenger demand. We are really hoping, again, coming back to 2019, if you continue to use 2019 as a benchmark, which is the best operating year ever in aviation, it would be difficult for you to see any growth. But year-on-year basis, matching 2020 to 2021, I think we will see improvements in travel.
Now, we've already seen some airlines go bankrupt. We've seen a whole lot of job losses and much more. Now, cost-cutting measures are one of the most strategic moves that airlines are adopting globally. Now, we've seen costs drop about 45.8% as well, and then looking at revenue plunge as well, about 60%. This is the global outlook we are having as it now, reflecting the impact we've seen in the market. But now, how do we begin to aggressively follow through with cost-cutting measures at this point in time? Because the aviation sector is largely bleeding for those in Nigeria. How do we now synchronize, merge, and then even bring it into bear the bailout fund that we've also had, the intervention fund for the aviation sector? That's just 4 billion naira, is just a drop in the mighty ocean. The forecast really looks quite bleak for Nigeria, much more than we have on the global front. How do we begin to cut costs for airline operators in the country?
I do agree with you. But I like to look at things from the positive side. What the COVID-19 pandemic has done is, I mean, the airlines, in terms of cost cutting and being lean, this is the best time in any airline's history, because what the COVID-19 has done is it has made every airline rethink every of its strategy. Whatever is not important is taken out. We've seen elevation of conventional systems into digital work streams. We've seen airlines that have basically elevated most of the processes into digital platforms. And this, of course, cost-cutting measures. So coming out of COVID-19 or coming out of the pandemic, what we will see is we will see the kind of vibrancy that we have never seen before. Everything that is not necessarily be cut out. Of course, not infringing on safety, or aviation learned a lot from this pandemic, and I really can't wait for us to show everything we've learned.
And looking at the scope of also flying smaller aircraft at this point in time, and then also merging for areas where similar routes you have the likes of, say, Delta, Emirates, and a whole lot more. The aircraft cannot be filled at this point in time to capacity. So how do we also learn to also incorporate or follow through with some of those models we have international airlines adopting?
Yes, we are beginning to see the upgrading of fleets to right-size capacity. We've seen airlines starting to rethink their fleet modernization strategies, going for more efficient airplanes, compact aeroplanes, of course, anticipating a light reduction in demand. So, like I said, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought a lot of thoughts to us. I hope that we can retain institutional memory, most importantly, and not forget everything we've learned during the pandemic. Airlines are now beginning to rethink all of their processes, all of their work streams, including fleet modernization, like we've never seen before. So, yes, it's been tough, it's been hard, especially on the side of personnel and investors who have lost money, but the airline industry is coming out much, much stronger post-COVID-19.
You seem quite optimistic, but what new twist do you also expect in terms of fleet modernization at this point in time? Yes,
I mean, speaking about Nigeria, for instance, I hope that we are going to start to see a reversion to turbopropeller airplanes instead of the conventional jet airplanes for 1 hour flights. So hopefully, this kind of, they say necessity is the mother of invention. And, if there's no heat, you wouldn't have the invention of the air conditioning systems. So we are beginning to see that come to play, I mean, right through the entire system or workability of an airline.
On-time billing and also looking at the cost of Jet A1 fuel, aviation fuel, at this point in time is also one of the biggest conversations we have now. The costs are just high, unbearable. How do we also navigate through this current reality?
Well, I mean, to control the cost spectrum of Jet A1, I mean, government needs to make some serious investments in in structures that would deliver the fuel directly at the airports. There is complete regulation of aviation fuel in Nigeria, and market forces, of course, are now at play. You have fuel prices at different locations. So government has no play actually in controlling the price of aviation. However, you can make the space a bit easier by providing infrastructure to deliver these products directly at the airports. That way you cut off some costs associated with the supply chain management. So, well, yes, I agree with you. Jet A1 is a major cost factor, but I mean, it's, for me, it's not top on my consideration in terms of cost optimization for airlines.
What would now be top on your own agenda?
Well, for me, I would say liquidity management, one. The airlines must be responsible, first of all. Then, of course, I mean, fleets or network planning is actually a dedicated sector of an airline. You don't just buy an airplane based on what you think or how you feel about the airplane. You know, there has to be hard facts associated with the operating cost of the airplane. You have to match airplanes to routes. If you don't do this, I mean, we will still continue crying the same cries that we've done over the last 50 years in Nigeria. So, I mean, this is the right time for us to go back to the book and implement, most especially, all the things we've learned from COVID-19. Well,
cautious optimism is one of the biggest sentiments we also have in the markets now. Looking at the forecast that we expect from IATA, that by the second half of the year, we'll see passenger demand also increase and then recovery pattern will be a little clearer, but it still remains cautiously optimistic. Do you share this sentiment as well? For some, the prediction is that by the year 2022, we will now start gradually going back to pre-COVID-19 levels. But there's a clause there. Now, the first half of the year is still likely going to mimic the same pattern we've seen, where the terrain is quite harsh and airlines will still bleed.
Yes, I agree with the cautious optimism. Anyway, I will share more stronger optimism. Some domestic markets have already shown some rebounding growth, like the U.S. domestic market, which is the largest domestic market in the world, has shown some very good signs of recovery. China, in fact, it is rumored that by the end of this year, the Chinese airlines will start to, show a positive balance sheet because, I mean, the challenge is with domestic markets like Europe. They rely heavily on international travel. And, of course, with the border restrictions, that's going to have, some dampening of the effect of expected growth in markets like Europe. But ultimately, bringing it back home to Nigeria, whether it is a cause of a reduction in the supply of available airplanes or seats on the market, we are now beginning to see increase in demand. We are beginning to see the airplanes being filled up. You can also associate this to the Yuletide season coming up. I mean, so I want to be a little bit more optimistic than what the numbers say. And most importantly, it will be a disservice to continue to measure next year, 2021's performance as against 2019, which again, I say is the best operating year in aviation.
Well, now let's talk about airport infrastructure at this point in time. Okay, before we do the airport infrastructure, let's also look at agreements like BASA. To come back, you have to strategically place yourself as an aviation hub and then make all of the necessary ground moves that you have to. But Nigeria is lagging behind largely. Our airport infrastructure are not necessarily in the best of shape. We've not necessarily made the best of opportunities with the BASA agreement and a whole lot more. The likes of Ghana are taking the lead. How now would you say do we have to see a much more aggressive, intentional interface between airline operators in Nigeria, the Ministry of Aviation, and then we come out with novel ways to be able to propel the sector?
Yeah, I mean, we can sign the BASA agreement with every airline, every country in the world, but I really don't see that. I think it might actually be a disservice for us to continue to sign multiple BASA agreements. I'll tell you why. Nigerian airlines are still operating point-to-point systems. If I give you an example, you have a BASA agreement with Ethiopia, but you don't see any Nigerian airline going to Ethiopia because there's actually no market for Ethiopia as a destination. So if you don't have the right airport infrastructure to support a hub and spoke system, looking at all the success stories in the world, I mean, let's use Africa, Kenya Airways, Ethiopian Airlines. The model has always been bringing the world to their country and connecting the world in their country. We simply don't have the airport infrastructure to support that kind of expansion. So we can sign, all the BASA agreements in the world, but if we don't set the right foundation, we're actually setting up ourselves to fail once again.
Do you think we're seeing a change in the body language of government talking about airport concessioning?
Yes, I think government has realized that the airports have to leave the exclusive list. If the airports are going to be global competitors, you need private capital to come in, and most importantly, you need the airport to be in private hands. The government, at this point in time, has come to the realization that the airports must leave the exclusive list of government.
If we were to play some level of assessment now, looking at the role of the Minister of Aviation at this point in time, going back to strategic engagements, now it's the operators that will tell you how the pinch feels when they wear the shoes. How would you rate the model of engagement we've also seen so far over the years? You're a key player in the sector. What has been your own play out of engagements with government at this point in time?
Well, this Minister of Aviation, is born and bred in the industry, and we've not seen a minister that has been as close to this industry as this current Minister of Aviation. The engagement has been very, very continuous from the ministry level down to the regulatory level. This government has really opened up its doors to dialogue with the operators. Hopefully, this dialogue could lead to improvements. We hope that most of the recommendations, of course, every operator is coming from a biased point of view because, of course, your first point of interest is yourself. Yeah. So, maybe we can find a way to collectively, drive this industry forward. But in terms of my assessment of engagement with the industry, this has been one of the most closest aviation or regulatory agency closest to the industry.
And what about allied services as well, linked to the aviation sector as well? How do you think we ought to also strategically position these service providers as well to ensure that at the end of the day, a bounce back will be stronger than the setback we've had in the past few months? Yes,
that alignment is already in progress. Every single meeting we've had with the Minister of Aviation or even the DG of the NCA has been, a complete dialogue with the entire industry, not just the airlines, because, of course, the airlines, we do realize that we cannot survive without the associated value chain. So this recovery plan, even in the bailout, even though we agree that the bailout is not as sufficient as it should be, there has been some provisioning for the allied industries. I think it's about ₦1 billion to also see if they can mitigate some of these financial impairments associated with COVID-19. So if the airlines grow, the allied industry would also grow, So, we hope that together all of us can come out of this pandemic.
Well, we also had the Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the Central Bank of Nigeria just closed yesterday, and looking at the fact that we still expect increased lending, we still expect much more intervention in terms of provision of funds, liquidity in the market as well. Do you think we have a proper borrowing blueprint or lending blueprint for the real sectors of the economy and understanding the areas that are capital intensive, like the aviation sector?
No, for us in Nigeria, the banks is actually out of reach for us. The interest rates are just too high. Airplanes are long-term investments. You cannot use short-term funds to finance aircraft acquisition. So for us, the banks have not necessarily been our first call. Most of the investments in aviation has been, semi-institutional, coming from private pockets. Very difficult to see airlines that have gone to the banks to raise capital and are able to maintain profitability. It's almost impossible to maintain profitability at the interest rates that we have right now. So the Ministry of Aviation has been talking about setting up a leasing company that will be able to purchase airplanes and then lease these airplanes or finance these airplanes or de-risk the transaction and give more or less interest rates around single digits for airline operators that might, assist them in acquiring modern airplanes. So the banks for us, I mean, it's in aviation, we almost never mention the banks when thinking about raising capital.
But that still makes it quite a difficult terrain to maneuver
absolutely,
through.
Absolutely.
Now, in our forecast for recovery and also strategically positioning Nigeria as well, we see the fact that we have the likes of Aero Contractor and others, but we still lack in terms of having a national fleet. It isn't a priority at this point in time, looking at the times we are in. But how important is it for us not to forget this project, Nigeria Air, as we're wrapping up the year?
Well, I think it's being put on the front burner again. Government has also made it known that the private sector participation in terms of funding will be as high as 95%. So government will just more or less be creating the vehicle to channel these investments. We need a buzz right now in the industry. I mean, with all the bad news we've heard all this year in, year out, any good news will help right now. We are hopeful, but again, I mean, if you don't get the airports right, any other project is just going to be a white elephant project. That's the sad truth. Without the right investments in airport infrastructure, forget about a national carrier or a flag carrier or whatever you choose to call it. You simply need the airports to support your expansion. Do
you think all of the 22 airports will be concessioned?
That's what we've heard. We've heard that they will be broken down into sectors. I mean, we're still waiting for the official communication from the Ministry of Aviation.
Okay, now wrapping up our conversation at this point in time, what's also your forecast as well? I know you are a diehard optimist at this point in time, but what's your forecast for Nigeria in terms of a recovery, looking at the travel pattern we would see along the West African corridor and then continental trips as well? Then we now talk about the bigger market, the world at large.
On the Nigerian side, I mean, we are expecting to see a rebound in performance, forgetting 2019. I mean, if we're going to measure year-on-year profitability or increase or whatever we choose to call it, I see Nigeria starting to rebound 2021. On the global front, I mean, with the hope of the vaccine coming up, we will see a lot of lifting of international restrictions. However, you know, Africa is still a bit scary for us because everybody hopes for the vaccine, but we've not seen any investments in cold chain storage facilities that would aid the distribution of the vaccines when we get it. So that might be an impairment for us if we don't start to invest in cold chain storage facilities now that would aid distribution or redistribution of the vaccine when they become available. And
what about our testing capacity as well, especially for airlines adopting this as an added service?
Yes, absolutely. Testing, of course, is mainly associated with international travel. I mean, locally, we don't really have any requirements for testing passengers when departing or arriving within Nigeria. But for international travel, yes, testing is a major problem. But, I mean, people have adapted. People have adapted to that, to the testing requirement, and everybody is now seeing it as the new normal.
Thank you very much for your time on the show today. Chukwuemeka Achim, Chief Operating Officer of Jet Support Services. And at the end of the day, the aviation sector over the years has remained resilient, and we hope that it's not going to relent on all of the efforts so far. But we hope that we'll have much more strategic engagements with the interface we are seeing with government, and then we have a proper blueprint to propel the sector and shoot it to the greatest height. Thank you very much for your time.
Always a pleasure, David.